Hello, everyone. Aloha and welcome to the October Hawaii Public Health Training Hui webinar, Ethical Care for Neurodivergent People. My name is Melia Schneck, and I will be your facilitator for today's training. Before we get started, I want to thank the organizers of this training. There's Makamai Namahoe, who's also on the call, and also the help of our Public Health Training Hui Steering Committee. These are our sponsors and partners who provided today's credits. These are more of our sponsors. These are the continuing credits that we are providing today. In order to receive your credits, we would need you to complete your evaluation survey by October 16th. Following today's training, I will be sending out Mahalo emails to the email addresses that you used to register for today's training. And if you're joining us by phone today, please email me at melia@hifi.org, which is MELIA@HIPHI.org, with your name and phone number used, just so I can make sure you get your evaluation surveys emailed to you. And after you complete your surveys, I will be emailing out certificates by October 25th. Please email me at melia@hifi.org, MELIA@HIPHI.org for any missing certificates. Before we get started, I want to go over a few Zoom housekeeping rules. All participants are muted upon entry with their cameras off. For all questions, please utilize the chat box or Q&A located in the bottom of your screen. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's YouTube channel. You will also be sent a link to the recording in our Mahalo emails, as well as the slides from today's presentation. To finish, I want to give our speaker a brief introduction. Zahava Z. Zadoff, she, her, is a spouse and mother who has been living in Hawaii County for the past 10 years. She holds several certificates, including master's level registered addiction specialist and certified co-occurring disorder specialist, working with the LGBTQIA+ community, fighting for disability rights, creating an equitable and just federal and state benefit system, removing stigma from the behavioral health narratives, and focusing on youth suicide prevention are main focuses of Z's advocacy and education work. Z, please take it away. You are muted.
I was muted, that is true. Thank you for giving me a moment to share my screen. I want to thank Hi-Fi for inviting me to be here today, and to all of the participants here on the webinar. I'm going to take a sip of water. Give me a moment. Okay. We're going to be discussing today ethical care for neurodivergent folks. Most people call me Z. I am perfectly comfortable with Z. My website and email address are here on the intro slide. So I always want to go over the objectives for the training today. I know that all of you had access to this when you decided to sign up. The objectives for, I'm sorry, one moment. I am probably going to read everything that is on the slides. I am aware that all of you have access to them, that you're looking at them here on screen, but I really try to honor the fact that people learn in different ways. We have visual learners, which is why it's on the screen. We have auditory learners, which is why I will purposely be reading everything out loud for those who process in that way. So the objectives today are to understand the definition of neurotypical and neurodivergent. You're going to be able to list 3 neurodivergent diagnoses, understand the concept of masking and how that relates to healthcare, and describe 2 practical changes that can be made in order to work more ethically with your neurodivergent patients. So of course, we were going to start off talking about ethics, right? This is an ethics training, which I'm going to assume is why a lot of you are here, right? Ethics trainings, ethics CEUs are very hard to find. So This is an ethics training. And so we have a link here on the slides when you get the slides later to the ethical code for physicians from the American Medical Association, as well as the ethical code for nurses. I did not put on the slides the ethical code for social workers and for community health workers, although those are available on Google as well. I did want to let everybody know that I am you absolutely you keep your camera off. I'm looking in the chat right now. All the cameras are off in a webinar, so I can't see any of you. I also won't be able to hear any of you. You will not be able to unmute yourself. So feel free to put whatever you'd like in the chat. I will absolutely be monitoring that. Also, I know in most webinars, Q&A happens at the end. I don't tend to be thrown off all that easily. So if you have a question and you're putting it in the Q&A, I will look at it as we are going through the webinar and do my best to answer questions throughout the presentation. Okay, so we have our ethical codes for our doctors and our nurses, and here I pulled a little bit out from them, right? So the ethical code for doctors, section V or 5, says specifically that a physician shall continue to study, apply, and advance scientific knowledge, maintain a commitment to medical education, make relevant information available to patients, colleagues, and the public, obtain consultation, and use the talents of other health professionals when indicated. So that is the piece from the Code of Ethics for physicians that we will be focusing on here in the training today. For nurses, you guys actually had a couple for those of you on here who are nurses. Number 1 says the nurse practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person. First of all, can I just say that I love that that is in your Code of Ethics. Second of all, that is absolutely what we're talking about here today, right? It becomes much easier to respect the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person with knowledge around the neurodivergent brain and working with neurodivergent patients. The ethical code for nurses also has as number 3, the nurse promotes, advocates for, and protects the rights, health, and safety of the patient. So it's really important to know what supports neurodivergent folks may need in place in the healthcare so that the nurses can help to advocate for neurodivergent people. So those are the ethical pieces that we will be covering today as we move through ethical care for neurodivergent people. All right, let's move along. So there's this understanding in the healthcare field, right, where most brains work the same, and there's this assumption that we all have that if brains are different, then there must be illness, right? Illness or damage. Like everybody operates in this way of this is how the world works. This is what normal and typical looks like. And if you fall outside of that range, then there must be some illness there. We work in healthcare. Let's figure out what's wrong with you, right? That's not what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be owning and identifying the fact that there are two neurotypes that human beings have, right? A human being's brain can fall under neurotypical, the heading of neurotypical, but we also have brains that are neurodivergent. So we're going to talk about what both of these mean. And I would like to say in advance, the definitions that you are about to see are absolutely horrific and ridiculous and give absolutely no information. The reason that I chose to put them here is because these are the definitions that are out there. This is why we're doing the training. Part of the reason we're doing the training is because these definitions and the information is so absolutely ridiculous that's out there in the world. So for those of you who are visual learners, I'll give you a moment to read without having to listen to my voice. So your definition of neurotypical, again, it's really bad, says not affected with a developmental disorder, and especially autism spectrum disorder, exhibiting or characteristic of typical neurological development. This slide drives me crazy. So here's the thing, right? we are determining that a person, their brain, who they are as a human, is neurotypical if they develop at the same way as their peers develop, right? If you read at the same time, if you walk at around the same time, if you crawl at around the same time, if you play in similar ways that we determine are appropriate, then you're neurotypical. But let's really own the fact that in 1957, typical looked very different than it did in 1973, which looks very different than it did in 1994, which looks incredibly different than it does right now in 2024. So having a definition around the brain and categorizing a person as neurotypical based on what happens to be happening in society in that decade is absolutely unhelpful. It's also unscientific and feels like people are just making stuff up. Neurodivergent, by the way, if you thought the last definition was bad, this one's worse. The definition for neurodivergent is differing in mental or neurological function from what is considered typical or normal, not neurotypical. So if we as a world decide that you're normal, then you're neurotypical. And if we decide you don't fall into that, then we decide you're neurodivergent. That is, it doesn't really give a whole lot of information, right? And it's not correct. So we're going to move on to this slide, right? There are diagnoses that are agreed upon by most clinicians that will fall under the heading of neurodivergent. Now, before I read those out loud and we talk about them, I want to say there are many more diagnoses that physicians and psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists are trying to add under the heading of neurodivergence. These are the ones that are listed because consensus has currently been reached with regards to these. If you go to Google, depending on the site that you happen to be looking at, some people will say bipolar disorder is a part of neurodivergence. Most will say PTSD is under the heading of neurodivergence. And I am going to tell you right now that A, we have no science around that says that that is the case, but also post-traumatic stress disorder, whether we're talking about what's in the DSM-4 right now, DSM-5 right now, or the fact that complex PTSD might be added to the next iteration of the DSM. PTSD is trauma that happens to a person. We talk about neurodivergence as a person is born with a neurodivergent brain or a neurotypical brain. Now, the brain changes from trauma. We all know that, but it doesn't necessarily change in a way to make a person's brain that was neurotypical neurodivergent. Trauma changes and neurodivergence are not the same. I see that there's a question. Let me check that out, and then I will go through the diagnosis. I will allow Maka to answer that question, and I will continue. So the diagnoses that are pretty much accepted, right, the consensus exists around. See, the fact that I'm talking to those who work in healthcare right now, you guys made me do a little work, right? Usually the slide just says dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia will list the diagnoses themselves. However, a lot of these diagnoses no longer exist in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual version 5, right? It just doesn't exist anymore. Dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia are no longer in the DSM. They are now referred to as SLD, which is specific learning disabilities. So when we say specific learning disabilities here, we're covering what used to be dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. Dyspraxia would also be one of the diagnoses, which is now referred to as developmental coordination disorder in the new DSM. Autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, Tourette's, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, hyperlexia, DLD, which is developmental language disorder. This includes dysfluency, stuttering, those who are non-speaking for various reasons, and synesthesia, right? So here are the diagnoses that fall under the category of neurodivergence. So this is a slide that I always go back and forth on whether or not I want to add it to a presentation because it feels like it might ruffle some feathers. So I want to own that in advance before we talk about this slide, that I have a question. Can substance addiction change? So I would say that a brain does not change from neurotypical to neurodivergent, right? You either are born with a neurodivergent brain or a neurotypical brain. If you're born with a neurodivergent brain, you may not, your family, your friends, adults in your life, right, when you're 3 months old, have no idea yet which diagnoses, right, causes the brain to be neurodivergent at that point. It's one of those, what came first, the chicken or the egg? So addiction is not automatically going to, it's not one of the diagnoses that's presently under the heading of neurodivergence, but it is also not something that can change a brain. A brain does not change from neurotypical to neurodivergent. And yet brains do change. I really want to say that out loud, and I want to honor that. Trauma of any type, as we know, absolutely can change a brain, but not in a neurodivergent way. So here's a slide that tends to ruffle some feathers when I talk about it in a healthcare setting, because I think it's worth having a conversation around diagnosed versus self-diagnosed, right? Just really taking a moment to acknowledge privilege that exists in our healthcare systems. What do I mean by this? Right? ADHD, for example, manifests very differently in males and in females. There are some studies around how ADHD manifests in those that are gender nonconforming. And so oftentimes you have people who are male who are diagnosed with ADHD, especially as children, whereas females don't, because of the way that their symptoms manifest, right? Autism, back in the day, I'm in my mid 40s, not that that's anyone's business, but now 140 of you know that, right? Back when I was a kid, even in my early 20s, autism meant that a person wasn't able to speak, wasn't able to function in the world, and sometimes had to wear a helmet because they banged their head. That is a stereotype and a stigma and a generalization that is harmful. And so many people were not diagnosed autistic way back in the day. And so really looking from a privileged perspective, I'm going to toss a story out, right? I live on the big island of Hawaii. I've been here for about a decade, and I live all the way down south, Ocean View, right? For those of you who don't know, it's near Waihinu, near Na'alehu, near South Point, the tip, the bottom south, the tip of the big island. So if my neighbor wants to get diagnosed, right, wants to go for a neuropsychological evaluation as an adult, because they were not diagnosed as autistic, they were not diagnosed as ADHD as a child, and they're struggling a little bit as an adult and they're not sure why, right? So they go to their primary care physician because they currently receive Quest. For those here not from Hawaii, Quest is our version of Medicaid. So they're on Medicaid. So they have to go to their primary care physician and get a referral. Well, here on the island, there's a couple of psychologists who do a neuropsych eval. There are two that do not accept Quest, and they have about a 1.5 year long waiting list. There's one who does accept all versions of Quest, but is unable to see a child because she works full time for the Department of Education. So if you're homeschooled, you can see her, and if you're an adult, you can see her. She's based in Hilo, but she only does the assessments on the weekends, and it can take some time to get in. So you go see your primary care physician and you ask for a referral for what we call a neuropsych eval. And more often than not, they're going to send you to Oahu, right? They're going to give you a referral for one of these places in Oahu. And now Quest, Medicaid will pay for somebody to come with you if you're traveling for health reasons, if there is a reason, right? So if this neighbor of mine who lives down here in Ocean View wants to go because they have anxiety related to their ADHD, which is currently not diagnosed, they can't get somebody to go with them yet, right? The purpose of them going to get the eval is in order to get diagnosed so that they can put supports in place that they need. So now you have somebody who wants their safe person to travel with them because they're a little afraid of flying and they're going to a new office, and Oahu is loud, right? For those of us who live down here, most of our neighbors are chickens and roosters, right? So to go to a big city that has the freeways, which, you know, has the worst traffic in the country, to go hang out there can be overwhelming from a sensory place and an anxiety place. But this person also doesn't have disposable income. So I want to go to Oahu to get diagnosed, to go have a neuropsych eval, but I don't have the money to pay for someone to come with me. So now I'm even more anxious. So now I'm driving either the hour and 25 minutes to the airport in Kona or an hour and 45 minutes to the airport in Hilo, and I'm flying to an island that I'm not familiar with. Now I'm going from that island, like now that I'm on that island, I'm taking an Uber or a bus, depending on money availability, and I'm going to a doctor's office, an office that I've never been to before, to see a doctor that I've never met before. And one of the big things that you have to do is you're sitting there for 3 to 6 hours, sometimes one day, sometimes two, and you're telling me to be my authentic self, not to mask, not to try to fit into society, just to be exactly who I am, so that this doctor can see who I am and potentially give me a diagnosis. Now, I know that you guys aren't allowed to talk right now, right? Because we're on the webinar. But do we understand what a giant ask that is? I want you to travel. I want you to drive, and then I want you to travel by yourself. And then I want you to show up in front of healthcare professionals you've never met before. And I want you to drop any mask that you happen to be wearing at all, to be as honest and vulnerable and genuine as you possibly can in a new space without the people who help you feel safe. And most people really struggle with that. So now I go and I manage to get through the 6 hours and I fly home. And 3 months later, I get my report that says that I don't have ADHD and I'm not autistic and I'm not hyperlexic, because I wasn't able to actually be honest. Because how could you possibly expect someone to be honest in that type of a setting? So I know that for a lot of healthcare professionals, it's hard. It's hard when somebody walks into your office and says, I'm autistic. And you say, oh, great, where can I get the records from? And they say, I'm self-diagnosed. And we roll our eyes sometimes because we're healthcare professionals and we know that a diagnosis can't happen from TikTok or from the reels on Instagram. And I do hear that. I also need you to hear that sometimes a self-diagnosis is more valid than one that happens in a doctor's office if that physician is somebody that you haven't never seen before. So I'm tossing it out. I know that that may have made some people uncomfortable. I'm saying it anyway. And I see that there's a question. I'm going to put that one on hold. It says, what physical changes manifest in the brain after trauma in a neurodivergent brain? We're not really going to get to all of that, but we're going to take a little, as we go through the presentation, there are pieces of the neurodivergent brain, the strengths, the challenges. And so I want to get through a little bit of that before I come back to that question. Self-diagnosis is real. And some of you may decide that I don't know what I'm talking about because I say that out loud. And I'm going to say it out loud anyway. For many people, self-diagnosis is real. So let's talk for a moment about how neurodivergent people engage in the neurotypical world. Why I phrase it that way? Because the systems in the world in which we live in are created for neurotypical folks. They just are. The way that everything works is neurotypical. The world around us is neurotypical. If I'm walking in somewhere that's a professional setting and I'm wearing headphones because I have some sensory overload that comes from auditory intake, people are looking at me and they're wondering why I'm sitting in a professional meeting with one headphone covering one ear and the other one sitting right behind my ear so I can still listen. Because we don't make allowances or accommodations for people who walk into offices with sunglasses on. We make an assumption that they don't want to be there, they're disrespectful, they don't care. Our first thought is not, oh my God, this person may have some sensory issues with regards to light. The fluorescent lights might make it hard for this person. We don't automatically assume that. We automatically make other assumptions. So how do neurodivergent people engage in the neurotypical world? You have two options. We either, I'm owning it out loud, I am neurodivergent, right? There are some diagnoses that were there on that other slide that I am diagnosed with. So I'll say we throughout this presentation a lot. There's two ways that we engage in the world. Either we engage authentically, which comes along with stigma and stereotypes and generalizations that continue to perpetuate the systemic ableism that's out there, or we mask. Those are quite literally our only choices. We exist as we are, or we try to pretend we are not who we are. So let's talk about masking. This definition is from the American Psychological Association was talking about it in an article that they had. And so this definition is taken from there. Masking is the conscious or unconscious efforts made by neurodivergent individuals to change their external behaviors for the purpose of blending into social situations. Now, part of the definition of masking includes the words neurodivergent. So people walking around in the world saying, I mask all the time. If you're neurotypical, what you're doing is not masking. And there may be questions there. And I promise we're going to get to it on the next slide and then the one after that. So just the definition one more time. The conscious or unconscious efforts made by neurodivergent individuals to change their external behaviors for the purpose of blending into social situations. So here's the question. Here's the question you're all going to have around this. But don't we all mask? Right? The introvert who has to go to the work party is masking to try to be a little bit more extroverted and try to like not be able to read with subtitles on their face how uncomfortable they are. So they're smiling, right? Whether they're feeling it or not. Don't all people mask? Here's your answer to the question. Motive matters. See, neurotypical people, when they change their external behaviors to fit into social situations, they're comfort seeking. That's what it's about, right? Trying to seek comfort. If you are a neurotypical introvert who is showing up at an event, you are going to wear the appropriate clothing that others are wearing at the event because you want to fit in, because you will be more comfortable if you fit in. Because if you show up in board shorts and a t-shirt and everyone else is wearing aloha casual, aloha formal, right? Their aloha shirts and their slacks and maybe a sports jacket, you may feel like you're singled out, like you look weird, like you don't fit in. So you will dress appropriately for the purpose of feeling more comfortable. Neurotypical people change their external behaviors in order to feel comfortable. Neurodivergent folks mask for security purposes. Comfort seeking versus security seeking. Now, for some of you on screen who've never encountered a neurodivergent person, or you don't know if those in your life are neurodivergent, this may sound insane to you. But I'm telling you that in the exact same situation around clothing, heading out to an event, for a neurodivergent person, we're trying to survive. It is a safety and security issue. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm going to explain, right? If I'm a neurodivergent introvert and I want to go to the same event, the same party, the same work activity, right? My plan is to show up and I'm checking to see what the appropriate attire is, right? What we're all supposed to be wearing. For me, the reason isn't because I want to fit in, because otherwise I'll be uncomfortable. I go down that rabbit hole in my brain as a neurodivergent person, and it's, if I show up and I'm not wearing the right thing, then people are all of a sudden going to assume I don't fit in. And if I don't fit in, then what am I doing here? And if I can't read the room and know what I'm supposed to be doing at an event and who I'm supposed to be talking to and where I'm supposed to go, then all of you are going to know that I'm a fraud. And maybe I shouldn't even be working at the company. And then someone's going to see right through me and how uncomfortable I am. And then I'm probably going to get fired. And then after I get fired, I won't be able to pay my rent or my mortgage. And then I'm probably going to end up homeless. And then I wonder what it's, we go there. That neurodivergent coworker is texting 4 different people to ask what they're wearing because they want to make sure they're not too overdressed, but also not too underdressed. That neurodivergent coworker or person or client or patient is going online to see a picture of what the room looks like before they get there because they want to know where the exits are, but they also want to try to figure out where can I stand or be that I'll be as comfortable as I can be in that situation without being the center of attention. We're wondering how long it's going to take us to get there. So we're showing up either 20 minutes late or 3 hours early because we're not sure about traffic. And if we see that we're early, we're not pulling into the venue because we're just not. So we're passing the venue and then we're maybe making a U-turn somewhere and we're pulling into the Target parking lot where we can sit for an appropriate amount of time until we show up so we don't look weird, because we are terrified of being singled out, because in our brains, we are seeking security. I don't want to get fired. I don't want to get laughed at, because laughed at means you all think I'm weird. And weird means my boss may not be happy with me, which means I get fired, which means I can't pay bills, which means I'm homeless. The action is the same. The motive is different. Neurodivergent people mask. We mask because we desperately want to feel safe. That's why. I really appreciate the question of why wouldn't a primary doctor's referral suffice, that the importance of traveling to the specialist for a diagnosis is the priority to arrange for travel with an accompanying supportive person. Do we have any advocates that can do something here? This sounds like unsound socioeconomic practices. Absolutely. Now, if your primary care is willing to write on the paper that you need somebody to accompany you, they then have to explain why. So if that person who's going for the referral happens to also be diagnosed with anxiety disorder, they can get a supporting person to come with them. But if they don't have any of the diagnoses that would require somebody accompanying them, then the doctor sometimes is left with no real option. And that's if you have a supportive physician who understands, right, and who wants you to go so you can get the diagnoses and see what's going on. Sometimes we ask physicians for a referral and it's like, all right, whatever. I don't think so, but like I'll write you the referral anyway. And sometimes you can't get your doctor to write that. But again, that works really well if there is already a diagnosis that's on board. If not, there's not much that even physicians can do in that case. Okay. I'm not always sure why that I have to add this slide, but I really want to make it clear. Unmasking is the goal. You are working with patients and your goal is to help them get healthy, healthier, to whatever level they are able to get healthy. That is why we are in the field. That is why we are doing the work, whether it's getting healthy from a psychological perspective, emotional perspective, physical perspective. If you really want to be able to help your patients, then getting them to a point where they feel safe to unmask around you is absolutely the goal. It has to be. So in the next couple of slides, we are going to be discussing the neurodivergent brain, right? Strengths and challenges. And I've started to say this up front because I usually get a question about it. So I'm going to say it right here. We are discussing the neurodivergent brain when masking is not in play. Because what happens is we're going to go through the slides and we're going to talk about strengths of the neurodivergent brain and challenges of the neurodivergent brain. And I will usually have somebody who pops on in the chat or the question and asks, hey, Z, why don't you have the meltdowns, like autistic meltdowns? That's a real thing. Why don't you have the panic attacks that come as a result of sensory overload? Why aren't those listed as challenges? And my answer is this. If we are talking about the neurodivergent brain when masking is not in play, which then would theoretically mean that this neurodivergent person has the supports in place to be able to operate as their authentic self in the world. When supports are in place, meltdowns are not a regular thing for autistic people. When supports are in place, sensory overload is not a regular thing for neurodivergent people who experience that. So I deliberately, consciously, and on purpose am choosing not to perpetuate the stigma that autistic folks have meltdowns all the time, that neurodivergent folks have sensory overload and freak out. Because it's just that. It's stigma and it's stereotyping and it's generalizations. Because if the supports are in place for your neurodivergent patients, friends, and family to operate and live in this world in an authentic way, those things are not part of the brain. Those things are responses to not being supported as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world. I hope that made sense. The chat may tell me if it does or it doesn't. I'm going to take a moment and just check out the chat here. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about some challenges. Now, in an hour and a half period, right, I can't list 15 things and have a conversation about each of them. So these are the 3 that I chose that I believe are the most relevant for those of us who work in healthcare. We're going to be talking about each one of them individually on a slide. This is just your overview. The 3 challenges we'll be talking about for the neurodivergent brain are object permanence from an emotional perspective, lack of flexibility and difficulty with change, and oversharing. So let's get into it. Object permanence from an emotional perspective. This is what, okay, from a scientific perspective, we talk about object permanence, where I will hold up my water bottle and I will tell you, here's a water bottle. But then I take the water bottle away, and someone who has object won't be, they'll be like, wait, what, do you have a water? Like when you can't see the water bottle, you don't necessarily know that it exists. The concept of object permanence. But neurodivergent folks tend to really have object permanence more from the emotional perspective. And so here's what we have to say about that, right? The receiving of comfort and support, etc., yesterday does not last in the neurodivergent brain. It needs to be consistent or there will be doubt. Let's tell another story. So you have a patient who comes in to see you, right? And they know you, and they've been seeing you for 2 years. And every single time they're leaving the office, you always pop in and you wave and you say, hey, Johnny, I'll see you next time. Say hi to your puppy for me, right? And that is something that you do every single time there's an appointment for 2 years, right? Every 3 months over 2 years, that is the way you end your interaction with your patient, Johnny. But now you have an appointment with Johnny and it just ended, but you just got a call, right? Somebody, your medical assistant just tapped you on the shoulder and said that there's an emergency in the next room and needs you right away. So you wave at Johnny and you're like, bye, and you walk away. Johnny knows that you care about him because you have had a caring relationship with Johnny for the last 2 years. But you didn't say goodbye to Johnny the way you always say goodbye to Johnny. You didn't say, have a great day, I'll see you again in 3 months, and say hi to Rufus, your puppy. You didn't say that. So Johnny's now leaving the office, and there is a part of Johnny's brain that is trying to figure out why you're mad at him. Right? He's sitting and he doesn't understand what he did wrong. Did I say something different? Did I forget to thank you for your time? Did I not ask you how you're doing? Oh my gosh, I forgot to ask my doctor how he's doing, how she's doing, how they're doing. You must be mad at me. And now as it's getting closer to the next appointment, 2.5 months later, Johnny's starting to dread the appointment. Johnny's playing out in his brain how he's going to apologize for whatever it was that he did that caused you to not say goodbye to him the same way. He's owning that. You don't know that. You like Johnny. Johnny's a patient that you've made great strides with, and you like him, and he comes in and he's happy and you get to see him. But Johnny has just spent 3 months convinced that you hate him, and maybe you're going to drop him as a patient. That's object permanence. That is a challenge of the neurodivergent brain. If things are not consistent, we're going to doubt. We're going to doubt what that support and comfort and love and help looks like because it wasn't there the last time we had an interaction. It's not your fault, by the way. I want to be really clear about that. As healthcare professionals, there's not much you can do about that in the moment. What you can do is 3 months later at the next appointment, you can start off and say, hey, Johnny, I realized that the last time I saw you, I forgot to tell you to send my regards to Rufus. We had something going on in the other room and I had to run, but I'm really happy that you're here today. And if you can say that at the beginning of the appointment instead of at the end, then Johnny gets to relax during the appointment, and Johnny gets to feel safe during the appointment, and Johnny gets to not overthink that whole situation going on in his brain the whole time that you're meeting. Object permanence in the emotional realm is a real challenge of the neurodivergent brain, and it's an important one to say out loud. Also, lack of flexibility and difficulty with change. Now, here's the thing. Structure and routine is really important to neurodivergent folks. But that's not just what I wrote on the slide. I wrote structure and routine is important because it is important for healthcare providers, loved ones, family, and friends to know why neurodivergent folks need structure and routine? It is because it sets up reliable expectations. Neurodivergent people trying to live in the world with or without supports, right? Knowing what is expected of us is a really important piece. And so whether we struggle with structure and routine, but we know we need it, or whether we crave it and we put it in place, structure and routine is important because it sets up reliable expectations. When things change, it may take us a little bit of time to adapt. And that's something we want you to know. We want you to know that it may take us a minute. So if we show up in the waiting room at 10:45 for an 11 o'clock appointment, and you know that you're not going to be able to call me back till 11:30, let me know. Let me know. Hey, Z, I really appreciate that you came early. You were here on time. All the paperwork is filled out. Just wanted to give you a heads up that the doctor is running behind, and it's probably going to be 30 to 40 minutes. So if you wanted to step out of the waiting room and go outside, get some fresh air, go next door and grab some coffee, like you have a little bit of time. That's still going to be hard for me because that changed. I was expecting to be in the room, in my session, in my appointment earlier. But the earlier you can let me know that there's a change, the better. And really just acknowledging the fact that it's going to take me a minute. We do not bounce back like that from changes that happen. We're not trying to be mean. We're not trying to yell at the person in the front, right, who's working at the front desk. It is just we're struggling because there's been a change. There's a question that says, can neurodivergence lead to substance abuse? I wouldn't necessarily say that it leads to substance abuse, but I would say that a lot more substance users are neurodivergent than what the healthcare field is willing to acknowledge or has education around. Because if you go back the couple slides to where we were talking about masking, if I'm masking all the time and then I hit masking burnout where I just can't do it anymore, but I still need to operate in the world, a shot of vodka sometimes helps, as does a line of meth, right? You're doing whatever it is that you can do to feel safe and comfortable where you're at. And sometimes that very much can look like addiction, which is why we do a lot of these trainings in the addiction field right now, trying to help addiction providers understand what neurodivergence looks like in the substance use field specifically. Sorry, give me one moment. I'm checking out a question. Could you please address the inevitable emotional discomfort of the parent who is trying with their whole heart to facilitate their neurodivergent child's best behavior during visits? Yes, absolutely. In an appointment with the physician last month, he said no judgment here, and that was life-changing. 100%. Thank you so much for the question, Desi. As we go through the strengths and challenges of the brain and continue moving, there's a section at the end of the presentation that will talk about ways to accommodate, things that we can do in healthcare, things that the 144 of you that are on screen right now can actually do to make your offices and your visits a safer place. And that question absolutely will be addressed at that point. So your lack of flexibility and difficulty with change is real. This is a slide that I always feel a little bit uncomfortable about putting out there because I feel like it's one of like the secret code things that us neurodivergent folks have. We overshare. It's what we do. We almost can't control it, right? Now, when we're talking to each other, we totally know that that's a thing. And we validate it in each other. We appreciate it in each other. We love it. But in the neurotypical world, it is looked at as a challenge. So I put it here on screen so that you guys can learn about it and understand what it looks like. The tendency to share too much or inappropriate information with examples and stories, that's oversharing. This second part is really important. The reason that we do this is due to the desire to be understood with no room for misinterpretation. But we don't take social norms into consideration when we're doing it. So neurodivergent folks tend to overshare. But it is really important that you understand the motive and the reason behind it. We have been misunderstood most of our lives. And so if you ask me a question any type of real question. Like, hey Z, how did you sleep last night? I want to say good, but I didn't really sleep good. But I don't want to say bad because then maybe you'll ask me a question. So I slept okay, but okay is ambiguous. So now I'm going to share with you all about my sleep. I slept okay because, really I like to go to sleep by midnight, but I was really tired because I was jet lagged. So I was in bed at 10:30, but my body's not used to going to sleep at that hour. So I ended up pulling out my phone, which I know is a bad idea, watching some Facebook, some clips and some reels on Instagram, which wasn't great. And then I accidentally came across this one reel, which like really jacked up my brain. And then I was on there. And by the time I even got tired, my brain was too busy thinking. And so then it took me a little longer to go to sleep. But then I forgot to go to the bathroom. And God, I got to pee before I go to bed because the bladder of a pee, right? And so now all of a sudden I finally fell asleep at 1 a.m., but then I had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the bathroom. And you are thinking, oh my God, I was just being polite and asking you how you slept last night. And I am giving you a 5-minute answer to that question. And it is because I don't want to be misunderstood. I slept okay, but I didn't sleep great. And I want to make sure you really understand what I'm trying to say here. Information that you're probably not even interested in having, but that is how my brain works. Don't worry, we're talking about strengths. Strengths are absolutely coming in right here. So, one moment. Someone asked what I think about the self-diagnosis tool. RADS for autism. What do I think about the validity of that? I'm going to come back to that. So our neurodivergent brain, we got into some challenges. Let's talk about some strengths, right? Direct communication, heightened sense of justice and fairness, and creative problem solving. So here's the thing. More often than not, neurodivergent communication does not involve hidden meanings. There's no manipulation or guilt present in our communication. Our tone of voice may change because we can't always control it. But you can trust, for the most part, that when a neurodivergent person is talking to you, that they mean exactly what they say. And here's my story around that, right? I'm neurodivergent. My spouse is neurodivergent. My teenage child is, right? We are a neurodivergent family. My kid is living in the dorms at UH Hilo, 17 years old, right? Terrifying, just from the parent perspective. So I was out there a couple of weeks ago. I go on Saturdays to hang out with them. So I was there a couple of weeks ago, and we were hanging out for a good couple of hours, 4 or 5 hours, and we were enjoying ourselves. And my kid says to me, hey, Mom, how long were you planning on hanging out before you leave? And my response was, oh my God, baby, I'm so sorry. I totally, I know you're an introvert, you need your space. I could totally leave right now. And my kid says, Mom, I'm just asking, how long were you planning on staying? And I'm like, yeah, no, I know, I understand. Do you want me to get you some food to go before I leave? And then now my kid's agitated. Mom, I really just wanted to know if you had enough time to watch a show with me because I wanted to introduce you to a YouTube thing I'm watching. But now you've pissed me off enough. Now I really do want you to leave. Now I'm neurodivergent also, and I'm really good at this with my clients and with my patients. I'm not so fantastic at it as a mom. And my kid likes to remind me, Mom, neurotypical people drop hints. Neurodivergent people speak pretty directly. If I wanted you to leave, I would have said, hey, Mom, I'm getting a little overwhelmed. Do you think you could maybe leave in the next 15 minutes? But that's not what I said. So it is really important to remember that regardless of tone of voice, neurodivergent people in their communication style are not trying to manipulate you or make you feel guilty, right? We're just talking. Now, not everybody remembers that a heightened sense, or not everybody knows that a heightened sense of justice and fairness is not just how some people are, it actually is a trait of the neurodivergent brain. See, for our brains, the things that should matter in determining an outcome need to be equal and objective. Facts in situations where a decision needs to be made are all that matter. And lack of fairness will often result in opposition. It's important for those of us who work in healthcare to be aware of this. Because going back to the example of somebody walking into a doctor's office, if I'm walking into a doctor's office and I got there at 10:45 for an 11 o'clock appointment and I'm not getting called in until 11:30, but somebody walks in at 10:57 for an 11 o'clock appointment and you're taking them first, I'm probably going to go up to the front desk and get into it with whoever's working there. I was here 15 minutes before this person, and I asked them, our appointment is at the same time. Why are they getting called in first? That's not fair. Now it sounds like I'm being argumentative. It sounds like I'm starting to pick a fight. It sounds like it's personal. I want to be called in. It's my turn. That's not actually what it's about. The neurodivergent brains is really, we really want things to be fair. We happen to have a heightened sense of justice and fairness. Now imagine that happens and it's not even about me. I'm sitting in the waiting room and I know my appointment's at 11:30 and I'm early. But two other people, one came in 15 minutes early, the other person walked in 3 minutes early, same appointment time, and you took in the person who came in 3 minutes. Now you're going to assume that has nothing to do with me. I'm still going to get up and go to the front desk and I'm going to argue about it a little bit. And you're going to look at me and be like, excuse me, ma'am, this has nothing to do with you. And I'm going to say, but it's not fair. It's not right. And it's not okay. Understanding where that comes from may help the judgment, right, that healthcare professionals may have on us neurodivergent folks, because that really is what it's about. Okay. And then creative problem solving. Neurodivergent brains, we see things that are often missed by neurotypical brains. The ability to integrate information and form many different conclusions is a skill that is so helpful with solving problems in a creative way. Now, one of the things that the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, right, it frustrates me a little bit because we use the same verbiage to describe two different things. For example, intrusive thoughts are a symptom for those with anxiety disorder, and intrusive thoughts are a symptom for those with obsessive compulsive disorder. But obsessive compulsive intrusive thoughts are so different than generalized anxiety disorder intrusive thoughts. They're different, but we use the same word. That comes into play right here. There is a concept called neurodivergent overthinking. Now, so many of us assume that overthinking is this anxiety piece, right? Oh my gosh, I'm leaving on a trip and what do I need to do? And I need to pack, but how many shirts do I need? And wait, will my family be okay? And what do I need to take care of? And how am I going to pull all that off? That it leads to this emotional energy that can be very like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Neurodivergent overthinking, it's comforting. It's actually a tool that we use to help us to be prepared for expectations. So when I'm going on a trip and I'm thinking like, okay, this is the hotel I'm going to be staying at. I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to look it up. Like, here's the hotel. Here's the entrance. Here's where my room is from there. There's the convention center. How long does it take to walk there? Hey, what do I need to pack? Well, it depends on the weather. I want to take some t-shirts because I'm a t-shirt person, but it's a conference. So I probably need some button downs. And how many do I want to bring? And, oh, it looks like it might rain. So I love socks and I wear socks all the time. Socks are my thing. And I don't want to bring one pair of socks a day because what if I step in a puddle? I want to make sure I have extra socks in my room to change into in between events because I want a new pair of socks right? And people in our lives are like, stop overthinking. Why are you overthinking? It's bad for you. Neurodivergent overthinking is fantastic for me because it helps me be prepared for whatever's going on. I don't have emotional attachment to it. My cortisol level is not elevated, right? I'm not in a state of fight or flight. I'm thinking through options. This trait of neurodivergent overthinking is what actually makes us as neurodivergent folks amazing problem solvers. Because if you have something planned and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that didn't work out. And you're like, oh, back to the drawing board. That neurodivergent person, patient, client, employee is like, oh, I have another idea. And you're like, no, wait, you should think about it. No, already thought about it. I've thought through all the options and I can help step in right here with exactly what we can do next. It is a giant strength of the neurodivergent brain. So then the question becomes, do we unknowingly penalize our neurodivergent patients by attributing motives to them which aren't real? Do we unknowingly penalize them by attributing motives to them which absolutely unequivocally are not real? I'm going to check a question right here. Does paranoia add new and challenging behavior challenges and challenging situations to neurodivergent individuals? I would say it doesn't add any more challenging behavior than it would to neurotypical individuals, right? Like attaching these additional, the co-occurring piece of it is not actually the topic for training today. This was more like ethical care, but I would love to talk with Hi-Fi and talk about, co-occurring disorders as for neurodivergent people, right? Maybe that's the next one that we do, because there are these things that when you combine, it makes it a lot harder as a healthcare professional to work with patients with the co-occurring disorders, depending on what they are, specifically psychosis related, because you're never 100% sure which symptom here is neurodivergence and a part of who they are, and we want them to operate in an authentic and genuine way, and which symptom is actually a symptom of a co-occurring disorder like schizoaffective disorder, right, or bipolar disorder with psychotic features that we're actually trying to address with medication. We don't want to medicate the natural tendencies of a neurodivergent person out of them, but we also don't want people having people experiencing symptoms that are painful and harmful to them if they are saying that they want it changed. So that co-occurring piece is a whole nother piece. And it is a super great question. Also, feel free to email me, right? My information will be again on the last screen, and you're going to get the slides, but I really do appreciate the question. So do we unknowingly penalize our neurodivergent patients by attributing motives to them which aren't real? And just a couple of examples, right? You're asking me to do paperwork. Okay, I can do paperwork. I struggle with it a little bit, but I can do it. So I walk into the doctor's office, right? Or I walk into the hospital, or I walk into my therapist's office, and you're giving me some paperwork to do. And I'm doing it. And the first question, right? Like, what's your name? What's your address? And so I'm writing it. And my address is long because I live in Hawaii, like 92-132, right? Like I'm writing out the whole address and I'm answering everything. But then there's like 5 more pieces of paper. And now it's asking for my name and address again. So I'm going up to the front desk and I'm asking, like, hey, do I have to put my information again? Like, can I just write C page 1? And the person at the front is like, I just need you to fill out the paperwork as I gave it to you. And I'm like, yeah, no, I understand that. But can I ask why I need to put my information on like these 3 other documents when it's already on the front page? And there's 3 people waiting behind me to ask a question. And you're like, this is just the paperwork. I need you to do it. And I'm asking, like, but I don't understand. Like, why do I have to do that? And now all of a sudden, security, please come to the front, right? Now you're calling on somebody else to come out here because now I am labeled a difficult patient. You're attributing a motive to me like I'm trying to cause a problem. I'm really not. My brain is trying to understand why I'm doing what I need to be doing. The punctuality piece, you're telling me to show up at 11:45 and I'm there at 11:15 and I walk in and you're like, you weren't even supposed to show up for half an hour. Yeah, I know, but I'm here early. You know what? We have limited seats available in the waiting room. It would actually be better if for the future you just came in at the time we're asking you to come in. Yeah, but I don't know if there's going to be traffic, and I don't know if a red light is going to be out, and I don't want you to make assumptions about me, so I'm always going to be early. And now you're looking at me like, God, what's wrong with you? Like 45 minutes before an appointment? Right? This piece of attributing motives to us, a seating arrangement, whether I'm in a waiting room or I'm in my therapist's office, or there's a particular office in the doctor's office that I really like, or there's a particular nurse that I really like that I see every time I walk in and they're not there. And now it looks like I'm giving weird eyes, right, to the other nurse who's coming to help me out because I was expecting somebody else to be there who knows me and I believe cares about me. We don't do super well with change. But if I have somewhere that I like to sit, the first time I walk into an office and I find a seat in the waiting room and I sit there, I want you to know that every single time from here until eternity, that is the place I'm going to sit when I walk into the waiting room. So when I walk in and that seat is taken, I'm standing. And maybe I'm standing in a way that's making other people uncomfortable. And maybe now you're asking me to sit down, but I don't sit in the other chairs. I sit in that one. Now, there's nothing for you to do about it, but then don't give me a hard time. Hey, Z, I really just need you to sit down. Can you give me an option? Hey, Z, if you're more comfortable waiting outside, we can come get you when it's your turn. Or if you wouldn't mind having a seat, some people are uncomfortable. That's great. But you're getting in my face and telling me I need to sit and then assuming I'm being difficult for scheduling, for special treatment. Like There are these pieces where we in healthcare attribute motives to our neurodivergent, to our patients, to our clients, and to the point of the question earlier, and to our families, right? To the parents of children. Like, we attribute motives that are not necessarily real. Like I said earlier, if I walk into my therapy session with sunglasses on, are you automatically assuming that someone is forcing me to be here and that I don't want to be here and that I'm disrespectful? Or maybe you can put somewhere in your mind that I may struggle with the fluorescent lights and the sunglasses are just helping me. Or maybe I really don't want a mask, but if you're looking at me in the eye, I'm uncomfortable. So I'm wearing the sunglasses so that I can feel safe and comfortable. Changing the narrative around these things. So I'm going to take a minute on stimming. You've probably heard of it before, specifically with autistic folks, but it really is a thing for neurodivergent folks in general. Stimming is the repetitive performance of certain physical movements or vocalizations by neurodivergent folks. It is self-stimulation. Now, here's the important piece. It is typically used for self-soothing and for expressing emotions, specifically excitement. So when you're telling someone to sit down, but they're pacing, I have a fidget toy sitting here on the table that my hand is playing with right now because I'm feeling a little understimulated, and playing with that fidget toy helps to bring me back to neutral. Right? So if I'm sitting somewhere and I'm playing with something and you're telling me, can you just keep your hands in your lap like everybody else? If my knee is tapping and you're like, can you just stop tapping your knee? If I'm standing up and I'm leaning up against the wall in like a squat position, because that's helpful for me from a sensory piece, and you're looking at me funny and telling me you should just sit down. Stimming is a good thing that should be encouraged. I hear all the time people who are in therapy, specifically adults who are putting their kids in therapy so they can stop stimming. I really just want to go to this restaurant with my whole family, and my son is just like incapable of sitting still. Can we do some therapy and teach him to what? We're not talking about obedience training for puppies, right? These are children, these are adults, these are humans. Stimming is me knowing exactly what I need right now, and at some level being able to take care of myself. Isn't that something that healthcare providers should be encouraging from their patients? So quick reminders, right? 20 to 40% of the global population is neurodivergent. Most statistics will say 20%, but then it says with all the levels of either undiagnosed or self-diagnosed, which doesn't count in most healthcare, in the healthcare issue in most countries, right? The estimate is 20 to 40% of the global population is neurodivergent. The next piece that's ridiculously important is that ableism is systemic. Everybody on here, I encourage you to find a training about ableism in healthcare and really being able to look at, really just being able to look at all of the systems that we've put in place that are just ableist. No headphones allowed. Wearing sunglasses, you're not allowed to do right here. Right? You walk in somewhere, there's 3 chairs, but you have 8 people coming at the same time. You put the chairs so close together that my thighs are touching with strangers, right? That's not comfortable. We just don't think about every place that ableism is, specifically within healthcare. And healthcare is the one place that we go to feel safe and to try to heal. What we really need to do is remove all of the ableism, the barriers, specifically in healthcare. Medical care needs to be safe for every patient who's walking in. And here's the big piece. There's things we can do to create accessibility. So let's talk about some of that. What can we do? We can absolutely bring equity to and reduce stigma for the neurodivergent folks that we serve. So what changes can we put in place? What changes can you put in place to support your neurodivergent patients? Step 1, lots of people talk about neurodiversity and use the word neurodiverse to mean neurodivergence. They use those 2 terms interchangeably. I even see some experts on Google, right, when you look at things, use these two words, neurodiversity and neurodivergence interchangeably. I'm going to tell you what it actually means so that you can then educate others, right? If I have 5 people in a space and 2 of those people are neurodivergent and 3 of those people are neurotypical, I now have a neurodiverse space, different neurotypes. Neurodivergence is a neurotype. Neurotypical is a neurotype. If I have a spot with neurotypical and neurodivergent people in it, I have a neurodiverse space. Step 1 that you can do is this is the symbol for neurodiversity. It was created by somebody who is neurodivergent, right? We always look to people to speak about themselves and for themselves and their community. So this is the symbol. What can you do? You can take it, you can make it into a little sticker, and you can put it in a small spot somewhere in your office. 97% of people who come in will have absolutely no idea what it is. But when I walk into your office, if you have that sticker or symbol somewhere or on your website, if you have that somewhere, do you know what you're telling me? You're telling me I understand that neurotypical is not greater than neurodivergent. I understand that neurodivergent is not greater than neurotypical. I understand that there is no neurotype that is better than the other one. And I know I know that neurodivergence exists. And so I am going to be able to treat you with the respect because we are striving to be a neuro-affirming healthcare center. Now, again, 97% of people won't even know what the symbol is, but I will. I will walk in and when I look for a doctor, for a psychiatrist, for a psychologist, for a social worker, for a community health worker, or for a nurse, I love me my nurses, right? When people are like, I want to see RNs. I want to talk to LPNs. I want to talk to my nurse practitioners, right? I love that I am able to, through my health insurance, I have like direct chat with a team of nurses when I have questions and what that looks like, right? What you're telling me when this symbol is up there is that you are not going to treat me like something is wrong with me or that I'm less than. Neuro-affirming. You are affirming the neurotype that I have. So step 1, if you are actually planning on learning more about neurodivergence, if you are planning on, if you desire to be neuro-affirming healthcare practitioners, then put this symbol up there because it also tells me that you're open to feedback and that you want to learn and that you really do want to show up and advocate for me like your code of ethics says that you do. What else? You can get more training. This is one 90-minute training, right? There is so much more to know. Neuroaffirming language. Some of you are probably wondering why I keep saying that autistic person instead of person on the spectrum or person with ASD. And it's because if I want to know about a community, I ask them. And the neurodivergent community has said, we are autistic, we are hyperlexic, we are dyspraxic. We are not on a spectrum and we are not a person diagnosed with autism. We're autistic. They have said this is a part of who we are and it's not a disease that we're trying to fix. It is we are neurodivergent and we are affirming of who we are. So I use identity language instead of person first language. So some of you may have been wondering why I was doing that. That's why. There's more training to get. I would say if possible, and I really want to own the fact that it may not be possible. I know how overworked and underserved our communities are and how overworked you are. I know that you're trying to fit as many patients as you possibly can into an 8-hour day because there is such a shortage of healthcare workers. But if possible, add some time to appointments so you can allow for questions. And when that neurodivergent person is asking you a question and you're like, oh my God, like, what is this? Try to make time to answer. I'm not trying to make you late to your next appointment. I'm trying to understand in a way that my brain needs. I may need the information a little differently, and I'm really just asking you to do that for me. Please don't cut us off when we're talking. Sometimes we're oversharing, and I know it. I know I overshare. I know we overshare. Let us finish, if you can. Could you imagine if every office had a low sensory space? So I could walk in the same way that you always, like a lot of offices now have the area for children. to go hang out where you have some toys and some stuff? Do you have a space in your office, a side room, somewhere off the waiting room, that instead of having the fluorescent lights on, you can have a lamp? That you can have a side table that has some coloring books and some colored pencils? I know I'm 46, but if I walk in and there's 18 people in the waiting room and standing room only, and the lights are hurting my eyes and I'm trying to advocate for myself or my loved one, if I'm waiting for 32 minutes, I would way rather sit down in a comfy chair in a room where the lights aren't screaming at me and I can bring myself down for a minute. Also, something you may not think about, it's really hard for some neurodivergent folks. You know how you see the nurse when you come into a doctor's office and you're going through questions and they're filling you in on all the information and you're getting your blood pressure, and then they walk you into the room and then automatically they close the door. That's the standard, right? For privacy purposes. Can you ask me if I'm okay with the door being closed? Sometimes even if it's open this much, that could make all the difference for me feeling comfortable. Because in a room with no windows and the door closed, not knowing when someone's going to come in and then randomly hearing a knock on the door, it can be hard for some of us. Usually after you close the door, I get back up and I open it just a tiny little bit because it makes me feel more safe to not be locked in a room. You can allow and encourage the support tools that we need. You can even have some fidget toys available. I just went onto Amazon the other day and I bought 120 fidget toys. Some make noise and some don't, and it was $6.47. And I have them available with me because next Saturday I'm on a plane to go to a conference and I'm going to be talking about accommodating invisible disabilities, and my plan is to put them out in the back so that anybody can have them or use them. Clear expectations. It's also really helpful if you narrate verbally what you're doing, right? Hey, I'm going to come over now. I'm going to ask you to lay down. And what I'm first going to do is I'm going to grab the stethoscope. Let me know what's happening before it happens, so we even have a split second to be able to say no. Oh, I'd rather not do that. But if the first thing that happens is your hand is now on my body without you verbally narrating it, you're not really giving me any time to consent or to say no. It would be amazing if there was a summary and instructions that we're walking out with. And a lot of us are good at that in the healthcare field. But even in the EHR, the electronic health record, just because you told it to me when I was in a room and maybe or maybe not feeling safe does not necessarily mean I'm retaining the information. Again, not every office can do this, but if there is one-on-one case management availability, hey, I'm your Dr. Z. I love seeing you. Everything is fantastic. I don't have the time. I know you have questions, and I really want to be present to clarify all of this for you. But I have like 8 other people that I'm seeing today. So I wonder, we have a case manager right down the hall here. They're with someone, but would it be okay if I had them give you a call? Because I can give them your file and they can know what's up and they can give you a call and you can come in for a meeting to talk with them in person or Zoom or on the phone, whatever you're comfortable with, and they can help you out with what's going on. Do you know what I just did there? I created healthy boundaries. I, the nurse, I, the doctor, I, the community health worker, I, the social worker, I, the CSAC, do not have the time to do this with you, but I absolutely recognize the importance of it, and I am going to normalize that support. I can't do this right now, but we absolutely have someone who does. Let me just walk by and I can introduce you to them so you know that they're a safe person, and they are absolutely going to contact you. You can also have lights in the room that dim. When I walk in and that light feels like it's hitting me in the face, little dimmer on the wall before you get there gives me the opportunity to feel more comfortable. The temperature flexibility, allowing for my headphones or sunglasses or whatever support I need. Filling out paperwork can be stressful. Do you imagine a quiet place to fill out paperwork? What that could look like for me? The non-repetitious paperwork that we talked about earlier. And this is one I didn't realize until with my own child, right? The blood pressure cuff on this part of the arm, right, where we normally do it. For my child, some of the sensory stuff happens from a kinesthetic perspective, from touch. They almost could not get their blood pressure taken. Every time they come in, like they don't want to ever go to the doctor because the blood pressure hurts. It absolutely hurts them. And we went into the office one day and my kid already had started crying, my teenager, knowing the blood pressure was going to happen. And the nurse looked right at my kid and said, "What's going on, sweetie?" And my kid said, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be crying. The blood pressure always hurts." And the nurse said, "That's not okay. We don't want to do that to you. Can we try it out on the wrist? I can do blood pressure on your wrist so that it doesn't hurt you there on the upper arm." And the look on my 17-year-old's face when the nurse offered that, now we go in and blood pressure is taken on my child's wrist instead of on their arm. And it's relatively pain-free. And it absolutely changed their entire experience of going to see a doctor because there was a nurse in there who took a look at my kid's face and had a moment to stop and ask, I can see this isn't working for you. What can I do better? So to every nurse that's on here right now, I want you to know that moment was life-changing for my child and for me as a parent. To watch somebody care about them meant everything. So then it becomes, what types of advocacy can you engage in? We can all do things, right? There is something that we can all do you can't do everything. You can't pull it all off at all times. You can't do everything. And I don't expect anyone to be able to do that. But there are things you can do. I really appreciate that, Desi. Thank you so much. I want you to know that there are things that you can do to make our lives easier. Those of us who are parents of neurodivergent kids, those of us who ourselves are neurodivergent, those of us who are adults, you can absolutely unequivocally make a difference here. So when you get these slides, which you will, you have some resources on here, right? Neuroclastic is a webpage from neurodivergent creators themselves, right? Put together a whole bunch of resources. Now, NeuroWild is only on Facebook and Instagram. Her name is M. She doesn't have a webpage yet, but she's an artist and an occupational therapist and speech therapist. She's neurodivergent, as are all of her kids. And the graphics, she literally, and she gives them away for free. She has a whole set of graphics on IEP meetings, 504s, meeting with healthcare providers, how to talk to your children or to other adults about neurodivergence so they don't hate their brains, right? Teaching us to be neuroaffirming. The Autistic Advocacy link right there is a group called ASAN, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Great resource. And right under it, autismacceptance.com/resources is a resource page that all neurodivergent people talking about what can be helpful, and many are doctors and lawyers and professionals, but speaking about it from first person. Monotropism, we did not have much time to talk about, so I did not have a slide around it. But monotropism is one of the new and latest pieces that are out there. They were trying to put together a unifying theory on autism. Monotropism is fascinating. I absolutely recommend you checking into that. We talk about ableism 101, and then you have some absolutely from, the National Institute of Health talking about neurodivergence, what it looks like, and how we can support it. I want to thank you for being here today, right? I always put this slide. Awareness makes choice possible, choice makes change possible, and change makes freedom possible. And we all have a right to feel that, right? Freedom is possible for everybody, regardless of neurotype and also regardless of age. So here's my information again here on screen. I want to get back to one of the earlier questions about a parent, right? Advocating for their child. And because we do that often. And it's a great question about a parent advocating for their kid, but it's just as much if you're an adult who's neurodivergent walking into a space. We all have this thing of trying to be on our best behavior, right? You're going to be in a room full of other people. You have to make sure when we get in there that there's a chair, you sit down. There's no running around. You can't be screaming right now, right? There's other people. The doctor's really busy. The nurse has 4 other places to be right now, right? Like this is therapy. You shouldn't be talking about Marvel, right? Like trying to prep us before we walk into these spaces. Imagine for a moment what life would look like for our keiki, for our kids, but also for ourselves if we didn't have to do that. I don't do that anymore. About 5-6 years ago, I was like, nope, mask off. I overshare. I'm in pajamas like 90% of the time, right? Ask my boss, I show up in sweatpants and a t-shirt, right? This is who I am. This is how I operate as a human. If you like me, fantastic. If not, my self-esteem is healthy. I don't need everybody to like me. I'm not going to put my own health, mental, physical, psychological, or emotional, at risk to make the world more comfortable. I spent the bulk of my life putting myself on the back burner to make others comfortable, and I'm just not going to do it anymore. Your patients shouldn't have to do that. You on screen, you right here in the webinar, you shouldn't have to do that. We can make the neurotypical world a more accessible place for those of us who are neurodivergent. And not because you feel bad for those of us who are neurodivergent, but because when you don't put supports in place to honor the challenges that our brain has, you miss out on all of the amazing strengths that our brain has. And the world deserves my strengths. And if you want my strengths, you're going to have to put some supports in place for the challenges that I have. So I'm going to check out the Q&A one more time. Awesome. Thank you. And we are, they said 120. It is 121. I am tossing it back over to Maka and Malia. Thank you all so much. Please feel free to email me. I love emails from people that I don't know. Let's talk. I could talk about this all day long. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, Z. This was such a great presentation. I know you answered a few questions during the presentation, but if you don't mind, I have a few of my own. Are there ethical concerns regarding privacy when neurodivergent individuals require more support or oversight, such as in care or educational settings?
Are there ethical concerns there? I would say that my diagnosis, your patient's diagnosis, shouldn't matter with regards to the additional supports that are there, right? The only pieces of ethics that matter when it comes to working with neurodivergent folks is the ethical codes that you all have already, right? Your job, part of the code of ethics that everyone on here has signed involves learning more about medical innovation and what things look like to better be able to advocate and to serve your patients. And so really understanding who they are, putting more supports in place. I mean, my interpretation would be that everybody should have all of these supports in place in every healthcare and education setting across the planet every day forever. Because I think that's what meets the ethical responsibilities, is making sure that we're serving people so that they could be their authentic selves. I also know that that's not always possible. Access requires money, and I'm aware of that. But I wouldn't, like the question, from ethical concerns, I wouldn't necessarily say concerns is the word. I would say that you keep it in the front of your mind and you continue to do what you can when you can, and you be honest about things you can't do. I really wish that we had a low sensory space here that you could sit and do paperwork. We don't have that right now, but I do acknowledge that that would be helpful, and we're working towards that. So if you would rather fill out paperwork once you get in the back, that works also. Choice.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your very thorough answer. It was really thoughtful. So this next question might be a little bit challenging, but I was wondering if you may be able to give us just one final takeaway to kind of sum up this entire wonderful training. What is like one sentence or one phrase we can take away?
Well, that's a question, isn't it? One sentence or one phrase. I would say creating access is a matter of will. If it's something that you want to do, you absolutely can.
I love that. I am actually writing that down because I love it so much. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing training. I want to extend a big mahalo to you, Z, for being our trainer today and provide a few reminders to us here. I know I was a little quick with the intro slides today, and I apologize for that. I have attended some of these trainings in the past, and so I was kind of excited to get into the meat of today's training, so I apologize if I was over quick. So I'm happy to go over some important things right now. This training was recorded and will be uploaded on the Public Health Training Hui YouTube channel. You can also find all of our previous training sessions there. I will give you a link to the recording in today's Mahalo email. To receive continuing education credit for today's webinar, please complete this evaluation form that will also be emailed to you. To receive the credit, the evaluation must be completed by the end of business day on Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. After you complete your evaluation, certificates will be emailed to you by the end of business day on Friday, October 25th. If you've not received your certificate at least 2 weeks after this training, please reach out to us. I will drop my email in the chat. I know I also kind of rushed through that. My name is Melia, and you can reach me at melia@hiphi.org, melia@hiphi.org. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to reach out to me and I can help you figure that out. We hope you join us for another training session. Aloha and take care.